Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness. Coaching on the fence. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal. Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
Oh, 2 weeks off. And it feels like it. Oh, man. Back with another hour of Cabin Sports Radio. My name is Lekter. Glad you could join me tonight. Couple weeks off. No Unbreakable Mike Gibbons today. He's enjoying a little extended time off down in the South Slave, doing a little camping. Hope he's having a good time. I hope he's trying to have a good time. I know he wants to be here. But Mike, you'll just have to take one more week. Just relax. Enjoy yourself. There'll be plenty of sports and chaos surrounding said sports to talk about upon your return. Like I said, 2 weeks off. It feels every bit like we've been gone for 2 weeks because so much has happened, whether it's the NHL, the NBA, the MLB, CFL, all around the world of sports. There has been a lot that has happened. So we're going to start off with the two sports that, their 2019-2020 seasons still hanging in the balance, which seems absolutely bizarre to say. The NHL and the NBA. We're going to run through everything that has happened in the last 2 weeks. Let's start it off now. Yes, starting off with the NHL, the 2020 return to play expanded NHL playoff format. The hub cities were announced just a couple days ago, and they are official. There are two of them. They are both in Canada. Edmonton will host the Western Conference games, and Toronto will host the Eastern Conference. Now, originally, we've been talking about this for a while, and it seemed like it was taking the NHL an excessive amount of time to come up with a decision as to where these hub cities were going to be, how many there were going to be. It's down to two. Two officially announced, and there it is. And, this makes a ton of sense. Obviously, there's a lot of logistics involved trying to schedule games in just two rinks, but as with all of the potential hub cities, whether they were in Canada or in the U.S., Edmonton and Toronto check all of the boxes around basically what the NHL is trying to accomplish with a safe return-to-play protocol. That being, they have the ability to make them basically a bubble-type situation. And quite frankly, it would have been a real shame to have a brand-new arena in Edmonton not be utilized in this event where the NHL just feels that it has to, above all else, return and play out the 2020 NHL playoffs. Also, this going with two hubs, both in Canada, I assume a lot of the idea surrounding that was to avoid any potential U.S.-Canada border complications. And with the number of positive cases we have seen, which has been more than a few since the NHL respective teams returned to practice facilities, and these have been kind of bubble situations on their own, but there have been a bunch of COVID-19 cases. 9 new cases actually just announced today. There were reports last week that the St. Louis Blues had shut down their team practice facility due to multiple positive cases. Tampa Bay Lightning reported a similar situation several weeks ago. Of course, I think about a month ago, maybe a little more, the Pittsburgh Penguins had reported a positive case, and this is all just within the last month or so. Also, there was a report that came out a week or two ago that Steve Simmons reported that Austin Matthews of the Toronto Maple Leafs had supposedly turned in a positive test. Now, this naming a player went against the NHL's protocol. They're not naming players, and if it can be avoided, they're trying to not even name teams, although that's tough when you're obviously getting a report when a team's entire practice facility has been shut down. But they've been doing their absolute best to not name names as to who the positive cases are, which is pretty achievable, and I think most people are respecting that this is medical information that is very much private. Yeah, I mean, they're professional athletes. They're in the public eye, but nevertheless, this is stuff that doesn't necessarily need to be disclosed. It's not like it was incurred while actually playing. It's not an upper but lower body injury, although I guess it would technically be an upper body injury. Regardless, they are not naming names, and generally when Steve Simmons reports things, I mean, he's been doing it for a long time, but you still kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. However, surrounding that, Toronto Maple Leafs goaltender Freddie Anderson had been living and training with Austin Matthews in Arizona, but was suddenly moved to California for his home base around the time of that report of Austin Matthews supposedly turning in a positive case. So you can reasonably, probably accurately put two and two together and figure out what happened there. Carey Price as well made some pretty big headlines last week when he voiced his concerns about the safety of returning to play. There have been some other notable players that have spoken out against it. Artemi Panarin mentioned although his wasn't so much around COVID-19 and worries about safety. It was more about players having to pay out an unfair amount of their contracts due to the money that the league is inevitably going to lose this year. Of course, it's going to lose money. That's pretty much a foregone conclusion. But his case was that this isn't fair to put it on the players, that the owners should be taking more of that hit when a global pandemic happens, which I think is probably arguable either way. Under the current CBA, it is set the way it's set. I don't think they drew up the current collective bargaining agreement with any kind of anticipation that there would be a global pandemic within the next 10 years. But here we are. And Carey Price's situation is kind of unique. Of course, he is the most important player on the Montreal Canadiens roster, who in the expanded playoff format will be included. They need him if they're going to do anything, and they need him to be in top condition. They need him to, his mind has to be in it. But he has two young kids at home. Him and his wife are expecting a third kid actually in the fall. So, bit of a tough situation. Obviously, number one, I'm sure he doesn't want to be away from such a young family and a family that is, inevitably, if the Montreal Canadiens do happen to do anything in the 2020 playoffs, he's going to likely miss the birth of his third child, which nobody wants to do. It's kind of, in a lot of cases, I guess, just kind of comes with the territory of being a professional athlete. But these are obviously very different circumstances that everyone is navigating right now. So I'm sure it's a situation where, on top of the fact that, you would always like to be there while your children are being born, in this case, especially with, everything that's going on, I'm sure he would love nothing better than to be there. And then, of course, there's the health concerns as well. He also mentioned in a recent article that the mother of a friend of his was one of the many lives that have been lost due to complications from contracting COVID-19. So hitting a little close to home for Carey Price. Nevertheless, he is expected, or I think he has actually reported to Montreal Canadiens training camp. So hopefully he's in the right frame of mind and, hoping everything goes well for him and his young family, certainly. Training camps, with that in mind, set to begin exactly a week from now, July 13th. There have been teams that have had optional practice facilities open. Players could choose to report. based on their situations about the borders, wherever they happen to be, their personal health. There's a lot of obviously moving parts that have enabled some players to begin training at facilities and some that haven't been able to. But official training camps set to begin exactly a week from now, July 13th. And then travel to the hub cities is scheduled as of right now for July 25th, 26th, one of those 2 days. And this is assuming everything goes according to plan. Expanded playoff format set to begin as of right now for August 1st. And I say this is assuming everything goes according to plan. But the very fact that the NHL has had several positive cases, they've had several practice facilities shut down as a result of positive cases. I don't know what it would take for the NHL to derail their current plan. It seems like regardless right now, regardless of what happens, obviously they have a plan in place for when positive cases do happen. They're having players self-isolate immediately. They're following up with them regularly. Testing is happening daily at these facilities that have been open and have been undergoing practice operations. But there have been I mean I don't know. I don't know what would have to happen unless, obviously if a government decides, hey, we're going to scale things back, go into a full on lockdown. Yeah, that would shut things down for the NHL really quickly. But as far as within its own operations go, with things that it can control itself, it doesn't look like there's anything that's really going to change their mind or their course of action. And if there was, I would have thought that would have happened already, aside from practice facilities being shut down and players immediately self-isolating. But the fact that there are positive cases happening does not seem to be any kind of barrier to the NHL right now. Right or wrong, that is the way they are moving ahead. It is full steam ahead. So I see, again, barring anything on a larger scale, beyond what the NHL can control itself, beyond anything like that taking place and messing things up, I don't see what would possibly derail this. So I'm pretty much fully expecting August 1st we will see the extended playoff format take place and see what happens from there. Honestly, I'm, despite everything, despite the fact that it's a little bit ludicrous that we are even talking still about pro sports and putting the importance of a return to play and finishing off a regular season above the potential health and safety of individual people, it does seem ludicrous. Coming from a hockey fan who absolutely wants to see the season and the NHL playoffs play out, I'm not going to ignore the fact that this is ludicrous. It is. It absolutely is. I'm tired of saying these are unprecedented times, although they are. But I don't know. It's a really, really weird place to be. But they are right in the midst of basically what every sports organization is dealing with. The NBA will turn there because they're in pretty much the exact same situation as the NHL. Obviously, a different plan for return to play. Teams are scheduled to head to Orlando this week to prepare for the 2020 NBA playoffs, amid concerns being voiced by players themselves about heading into one of the renewed hotbed states for COVID-19. Yeah, it's one thing to be heading to Edmonton or Toronto, which, are not perfect. The risk is still very much there. But you really got to feel for these NBA teams, for the players that are heading right into the fire, right into Florida, where everything reopened way too quickly, and they're seeing massive spikes in COVID-19 cases. Obviously, a similar type situation where they are going to be, there's going to be like a bubble type atmosphere enacted. There's going to be minimal contact with, quote unquote, the outside world. We're still trying to make it there because as of today, 7 NBA teams have shut down their practice facilities due to positive test results. The latest, just actually announced today, was the Sacramento Kings, while yesterday the Eastern Conference leading Milwaukee Bucks announced that they had shut down their practice schedule as well. And before that, the LA Clippers, Miami Heat, Phoenix Suns, Denver Nuggets, and Brooklyn Nets all shut down their practice operations due to positive cases. So very much the same as the NBA. They are having what most people would consider setbacks, and they don't seem to be really changing the plan at all, losing any steam. It's still a go. So again, very much the same situation as the NHL. They are steaming ahead regardless of anything that happens, or at least anything that's not beyond their control. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens there. Hopefully, you know, you just hope that everyone stays healthy. Honestly, it's again, just very, very, very strange that we are putting sports ahead of health and safety, but there's a lot of money at stake, and that's basically what it comes down to. Currently, the NBA season set to return 2 days before the NHL on July 30th, and teams heading to Orlando this week. So we'll see how that goes. And we'll continue to round out all of the other chaos around the world of sports. Going to take a break and come back with that on Cabin Sports Radio.
The Cabin Sports Radio Podcast, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Cabin Sports Radio is proudly sponsored by Sport North. Check them out at sportnorth.com. And next week, something to look forward to on the show for sure, the debut of Billy O. Bill Othmer going to join us on Sport North to talk about something very exciting. I'm going to let a little bit of it slip, but details forthcoming. The 68th Peterson and Auger annual golf tournament in support of Kids Sport NWT is a go. It's going to happen, I believe, in August, but Billy O will join us next Monday on the show to talk about that and give us all of the details we need to know. Obviously, very exciting news with everything going on. We weren't sure, well, we're 100% sure if that was going to happen. Of course, normally that tournament would have taken place, I believe, this week, usually early July, late June sort of thing. They had to push it back, had to get some things figured out. But good on the Yellowknife Golf Club and Sport North and Peterson and Auger getting that figured out. It is always a huge event and raises some always much-needed funds for the Kids Sport program, Kids Sport NWT. And anytime you would like to make a donation, you can, of course, once those details are revealed, and they will be advertised from that point on, letting you know when the golf tournament is happening. Everything else you need to know, of course, you will be able to find at sportnorth.com. And hopefully all of those details will be fleshed out this week, or next week, rather, on Cabin Sports Radio. But anytime you would like to make a donation to Kids Sport, which is a fantastic program, having run it myself briefly here in the North, I can tell you it is well worth your donation dollars. Kids Sport NWT. You can access that by going to sportnorth.com, heading over to the right side of the top scroll, and you will see Kids Sport NWT. And if you want to make a donation anytime, you are more than welcome to. Fantastic program, and fantastic sponsors are Sport North of Cabin Sports Radio. So looking forward to talking to Billy O next week on the show and unveiling the details of the 68th Peterson and Auger golf tournament. It's going to be a ton of fun. All right, getting back into what is happening in the world of sports. The last 2 weeks have been nuts. We went through the NHL and the NBA's proposed return to play formats, their plans as of right now. Let's turn to Major League Baseball. Now, they obviously differ from the NHL and NBA in that they didn't have a season that was already underway. They had a little bit of time to kind of sit back, see exactly how things were playing out, and figure out where they wanted to go from there. And it looked, as of a couple weeks ago, that direction was heading in the way of catastrophe. You may recall, if you're a regular Cabin Sports Radio listener, I was kind of kicking myself for not putting money on, and I assumed there were Vegas odds on this, whether or not the Major League Baseball season would actually happen in any way, shape, or form. Things were going sour in a hurry. Again, this is as of 2 weeks ago. The Major League Baseball, the owners had proposed a 60-game season with prorated salaries. It seemed like a foregone conclusion that the Players Association was going to reject that. They did without hesitation. And they didn't even have time for hesitation, as I recall. I think they were given only like 24 hours to answer. They didn't even need that long. They rejected it soundly. But since that time, they've figured things out. Spring training is now underway. And all kinds of reported COVID-19 related difficulties be coming up now. However, opening day still currently scheduled for July 23rd or 24th. Lots of complications. It has been, honestly, to be nice about it, it's been a mess so far. 2 big-name players, those being Atlanta pitcher Felix Hernandez and former Blue Jay David Price, have already announced that they have chosen to opt out of the 2020 season. And depending on who you ask, it seems likely that they will not be the only ones. While, of course, the NHL and NBA have also experienced multiple positive cases, as we talked about a little bit earlier on in the show, in their return to play efforts, even while employing, strict bubble guidelines on practice facilities, the feeling is that the MLB is not taking nearly the same amount of precaution, and reports now that one of those positive cases, being Freddie Freeman, is apparently very sick as a result, and it's not sitting well with the players. They're very concerned, and as well they should be. We've talked a lot of people have talked about who COVID-19 is the biggest threat to. We know it is of a certain age group, none of which Major League Baseball players fall into. But the virus changes from person to person, affects people differently. You could have it in your system and not even know it. It could come through and leave you, and you have very little, if no symptoms, or you could have extreme symptoms, be bedridden for several weeks. And reportedly, that is what's going on with Freddie Freeman. He is very, very sick, and it's got some players very, very concerned, because if it could happen to him, legitimately, it could happen to any of them. So the thought is that either the Major League Baseball, the league, needs to perhaps adjust the way it is planning on carrying out this 60-game season, or we may see more of this. I mean, money is no object to a lot of these players. Obviously, they know their worth. They have agents when they're negotiating new contracts. They want to make as much money as they possibly can, because you never know what could happen the next year. So you obviously, you get as much money as you can when you're negotiating a new deal. But when it comes to your health and the threat of something that you can't train for, you can't really prepare for, aside from what the league has kind of set out. And if the feeling is that the league is not protecting the players to its full ability, I would not be surprised for a second if you saw more players suddenly opt out. Unless these guys are just terrible at managing their money, a lot of them are pretty financially well off, and it would not really hurt them that badly to take a year off, especially players like the 2 that have already announced that they will not be playing. Felix Hernandez, David Price. These are veteran guys who have made a lot of money, and you're not going to threaten them I mean, there's obviously clauses in the collective bargaining agreement with any of these leagues. There's a lot of money at stake. They got to protect themselves. But these, again, the phrase that we're all sick of hearing and really, really sick of saying, these are unprecedented times. And it seems just practical for players to protect themselves. A lot of these players have young families as well, possibly, grandparents that are very much at risk. You can't take any chances, and eventually it comes down to what is worth more, the health of yourself and your loved ones, or a season of baseball and making a couple million when you maybe have already played 10 years and have made a couple million every year, as pretty much all Major League Baseball players do make. So again, while, things are not going exactly smooth for the NHL and NBA, smooth sailing compared to the MLB. So we'll see what happens there. We'll see if more players decide to opt out. And again, the only ones benefiting from all of this in Major League Baseball are the Houston Astros, because nobody cares about that anymore. And you know what? We'll finish off with the CFL. That is another league that, well, they're in a bit of a unique situation as well, because the CFL season would have kicked off this past weekend, normally around the Canada Day long weekend. Obviously, we didn't have a long weekend this year, but generally the CFL season kicks off around Canada Day. That obviously didn't happen. We've known for a while now that if we were going to have a CFL season, it seemed like pretty well accepted that it was going to start Labor Day weekend and be a shortened 9-game schedule. That seemed to be the return to play plan that everyone felt was pretty likely to happen. Things went a little quiet over the last couple weeks, but return to play talks ramped up last week, with the CFL tabling a return to play proposal that also included an outline of a new collective bargaining agreement. Apparently, talks between the CFL and the CFL Players Association have been positive. They have made a lot of good progress with regards to potentially saving this season, which, depending on who you ask, is a pretty dire situation. There have been pretty grim reports saying that, the league could very well go under if they are not able to salvage any type of season in 2020. Obviously, that is very concerning to a lot of people, a lot of CFL fans, a lot of players who are relying on employment, coaches, families of those players. It affects a lot of people. And, it may not obviously be the type of money that the NFL generates and salaries that the NFL doles out, but that makes it even more crucial that these players are even more reliant on making those salaries. So beyond the fact that, the CFL operates on a shoestring budget as it is, and losing that kind of major revenue could wipe out the league altogether, it's a pretty dire situation. So the league and the Players Association doing seemingly absolutely everything they can to make sure that does not happen, and we do salvage some type of 2020 CFL season. Again, pretty much a foregone conclusion that if it does happen, it's going to be September, and it will be a 9-game season. The CFL also talking about going the hub location route, which seems just the smartest and most practical way to go. And the pretty accepted rumor as of right now seems to be that those two hub cities would be Winnipeg and Hamilton, those being two of the three newest facilities in the league. Of course, Regina just played their first season in their new facility last year. So that would also be a really good option as well. Obviously, Winnipeg and Hamilton, a province closer to one another than Saskatchewan. So I have to think that probably factors into the decision as well. I would think it's, in terms of Winnipeg possibly being a hub city, it probably has a lot to do with the fact that it is situated, Investors Group Field is situated right on the University of Manitoba campus. So there is a pretty workable situation as far as creating a bubble-like atmosphere with, as little interaction with non-CFL players, personnel, officials as possible. It's very possible to do in Winnipeg and Hamilton. Not as familiar with the surrounding area of what used to be Ivor Wynne Stadium, now is Tim Hortons Field. Exact same location, but not falling down, which Ivor Wynne Stadium was just a few years ago. But Tim Hortons Field, pretty good from all accounts. Pretty good situation there as well. So that seems to be where the CFL is headed if there is a return to play. But very good to hear that return to play talks have been very fruitful as of late. So really just fingers crossed that we are able to see a, albeit shortened, but a 2020 CFL season. And that'll do it. That's pretty much as far as the COVID-19 related situation around the CFL, Major League Baseball, the NHL, and the NBA. That's pretty much it. There's a lot of other stuff going on. We could get into the NFL, the Washington Redskins, renewed calls to change that name, which should have been done years ago. But you know what? I'm going to hold off on that because I know Mr. Jesse Wheeler has a lot of thoughts on that. So I'm going to give him the opportunity to join us next week on Cabin Sports Radio, and we could talk about all that because I'm sure that conversation is far from over and done with. Will be interesting to see where that goes. But I'm going to call it a night. You have yourselves a wonderful rest of your Monday. Thank you so much for joining me on Cabin Sports Radio on the Cabin Radio Network. Talk to you again next week. Unbreakable Mike Gibbons will be back, and perhaps a visit from the elusive Mr. Jesse Wheeler. Have a good one. Talk to you then.